On Friday, May 23rd, a normally withdrawn, physically frail young man embarked on a murderous rampage that began with the stabbing deaths of 3 men in his apartment complex. Then, as though following the script to a horror movie, he drove to Sorority Row at Santa Barbara City College, where he shot 2 women to death and wounded a third, then proceeded to fire shots at a man and a woman, wounding them both. He then drove to the Isla Vista Deli Mart, shot 1 man to death, and continued on a shooting rampage from his car that also struck multiple people. His short life and even shorter reign of terror ended with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He left 6 murdered bodies in his wake and 13 more wounded. But he also left critical clues to his motives: a 141-page typed manifesto and autobiography detailing his thoughts on women, relationships, and the supposed cruelty of his remarkably affluent life, as well as a handful of YouTube videos, including one chilling send-off filmed just before the massacre took place. Predictably, the activists that respond to any national tragedy by pushing their agenda have seized on the moment, and the anti-gun, anti-video game, and anti-pornography advocates have bellowed louder than ever before. But in this presentation, we will look deeper into the killer's own words in search of answers. Was Elliot Rodger made into a monster by an American popular culture that glorified guns, sex, and violence, or was there a more specific, more personal answer? The clues begin with a line from his manifesto. Describing his behavior in grade school, he said he was deliberately weird to get attention, and said, chillingly, "Infamy is better than total obscurity."
Hey, Elliot Rodger here.
Born July 24, 1991, in London and weighing 5.4 pounds, Elliot Oliver Robertson Rodger was the firstborn son of Peter and Lector Rodger. Peter, age 26, was a professional photographer and aspiring film director. Lector, age 30, was a nurse on film sets and as such had become a socialite among the likes of Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, the latter of which she dated. Rodger gives an uncomfortably detailed and reverent account of his conception.
My mother and father had been married for a couple of years before my mother became pregnant with me. In fact, her pregnancy was an accident. She had been taking pills to prevent pregnancy, but when she visited my father on one of his film sets, she fell ill and the medication she took for that illness thwarted the effect of the anti-pregnancy pills. And so their lovemaking during this period resulted in my life.
Rodger idealized his early childhood as a time of carefree bliss, living an affluent lifestyle in London and traveling the globe to multiple countries. It is here that we begin to see the groundwork for Rodger's worldview. Throughout the manifesto, he refers to things he felt subconsciously at various points of his life. He is, of course, using the expression incorrectly. If he's aware of how he's feeling, then it isn't subconscious. Nevertheless, Rodger does unwittingly reveal a great deal of his subconscious in the manifesto, and it is here that we begin to get a picture of who he truly was, and from there learn what circumstances, thoughts, and actions may have led up to his killing spree. First and foremost among these revelations is the worshipful, almost godlike tone with which he regards his father. Central to his frustration in life was the fact that his father's directing career ultimately focused primarily on commercials and second unit footage rather than meeting with the greatness which Elliot Rodger believed his father deserved. Peter Rodger's only feature, the ecumenical documentary Oh My God, was a commercial disaster that would plunge the family into years of debt and financial difficulty. I had actually seen this film when it came out, and the elder Rodgers gives considerable, even predominant, attention to New Age mystics. Later, Peter Rodgers will share the same interest in New Age mysticism with his son, with disastrous results. Another prominent feature of Elliot Rodger's early life is his temper tantrums. For example, throwing a fit when he doesn't get the first piece of cake at his birthday party. These tantrums, however, are not isolated incidents, but rather a trend that will continue all the way into adulthood. Then there are the memories that establish his sense of inferiority, such as being told to wait below while his parents and family friends adventure to the top of an interesting tower in a castle they visit, or being told he's too small for the rides at theme parks. One interesting inclusion during this time is occasions where Rodger talks about hurting himself when he touches various plants after being told not to. It's a briefly mentioned topic, but it stood out as curious to me, as though a poetic piece of foreshadowing that his curiosity is returned with flashes of pain. Elliot Rodger moves to America with his family around the time of his 5th birthday. The Rodgers settle in an upscale part of Woodland Hills, California. Elliot becomes upset when he learns that the room he wants is going to his sister, Georgia. His parents initially enroll him in Pinecrest Elementary, but then move him to the farm school at the suggestion of a family friend. It's here that Elliot meets his first bully, named Joey, who he calls a
rotten little prick who I would always get in fights with.
Interestingly, he doesn't say who started the fights. Elliot's first U.S. friend was a little girl named Maddie Humphreys. He goes into extraordinary detail regarding the parents of his various friends, emphasizing how affluent they are. He also describes bathing as a small child with Maddie and saying it was the only time he saw a girl his own age naked. Considering the context in which he's framing this, it's particularly disturbing. He also lays down the groundwork for his views on gender relations, saying,
When I think about the experiences I had during my friendship with her, it makes me think ominously of the fact that all children, boys and girls, start out the same. We all start out innocent, and we all start out together. Only through the experiences and circumstances of growing up do we drift apart, form allegiances, and face each other as enemies.
This is not a belief he holds continuously through the piece. By the end of it, he is ranting about how all women have something mentally wrong with them and should be herded off into camps. During this time, Elliot played with Maddie's other girlfriends without difficulty. Meanwhile, Peter begins directing commercials for what Elliot refers to as prestigious companies, and the family begins to enjoy considerable affluence. Still, Peter's career leaves him frequently absent from Elliot's life. To quote,
"The only downside of this was my father's absence from my life. Despite this, I always looked up to him as a powerful and successful man."
This deific view of his father will come to define our understanding of Elliot Rodger. Elliot meets the one friend who will be with him most of his life, James Ellis. Various other groups of friends come and go, but James remains the constant and seemingly only true friend Elliot ever has. Elliot describes James as having a
blonde, regal King Arthur look.
Throughout his life, Elliot Rodger holds blonde hair in high regard, both as a sign of beauty and a sign of racial purity. The beginnings of his feelings of alienation from other kids do not begin with sexual prowess, but rather with realizing that he is biracial, half white, half Chinese, while the so-called popular kids he so envies are white. This manifests later in life in his views on love and sex when he begins to feel particular rage towards interracial couples, especially those in which non-white men are able to attract white women. Elliot even attempted to mask his own ethnicity as a child by dyeing his hair blonde. The second stage of Elliot's alienation is when the children around him, including the girls, begin to grow taller and he does not. He describes his younger years as ideal because nobody had unfair advantages, i.e., nobody was taller than anybody else. Obviously, these factors are manifestations, not causes, of Elliot Rodger's depraved mental state. After all, I've known a number of men who are 5 feet tall or less, and none of them turned into psychotic killers. The same goes for the multi-ethnic persons I've known, and I would imagine that most people would say the same. We all have physical advantages and disadvantages, but most people learn how to make themselves work in some way with society at large. In the Christmas of his 6th year, Elliot Rodger received a Nintendo 64, his first gaming console. It was his father who introduced him to gaming, and they bonded over playing video games. Keep this in mind. Just prior to his 7th birthday, he becomes aware of tension between his parents. He asks his mother if they are planning to get a divorce, and she promises they will not. Shortly after his 7th birthday, a divorce does in fact come to pass, and he feels betrayed by his mother. Elliot marks the divorce as a crucial turning point. Once the parents are separated, Elliot then begins to describe his mother's, quote, kind and loving nature, where he'd previously only focused on his father and grandmother. Elliot's father eventually settles into a home in the Topanga Mountains and begins dating Soyama Akabone. Elliot describes this as his first realization that there is such a thing as a girlfriend. He refers to his father's acquisition of a girlfriend and elaborates on how this makes him view his father as a highly attractive, romantically viable man. In the years following the divorce, we begin to see the fundamental dichotomy that will define his relationship with his parents. On the one hand, a mother that showers him with affection and tends to his every need, and on the other hand, a father who is largely absent from his son's life due to business concerns. Elliot's is not the kind of absentee father that is a deadbeat, but rather the sort that is devoted to more important matters than raising his son. Ultimately, this is not a bad thing. His work afforded Elliot the lavish opportunities that he was too self-absorbed to appreciate. But nevertheless, all of this looks very different to a child. He quickly comes to resent Soyama, who, by his account, is the only consistent disciplinarian in his life. He prefers spending time with his mom, who makes life pleasant. His mother is able to get him into the red carpet premieres of all 3 Star Wars prequels, as well as Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Throughout the years, Elliot uses these events as opportunities to impress his classmates, but they seldom seem interested. He begins to see Maddie less often, and his friend James turns him onto Pokemon cards, of which he becomes an avid collector. Throughout his childhood, Elliot would meet various kids that he points out he would later go on to hate for their success with girls. He has friends, but usually he just talks about the fun he had with them, not any deep emotional connections. When he plays with groups of friends, he regularly becomes jealous and starts crying when the attention shifts away from him. He describes a game he would play with his friend Shane where they were rivals and Shane took it too seriously and they had a fight. Once again, he is ambiguous at best about who started the fight. Elliot's father becomes a successful commercial director and buys a new house which Elliot loves. There's a room near the master bedroom that has a balcony and its own bathroom, and Elliot throws a fit spanning several days when he finds out he can't have it. His father decides to give it to him. Remember that. At this point, he comes to realize that hierarchies exist and that there is such a thing as the cool kids at his school, and blames his parents for not raising him to be a cool kid. He takes up skateboarding to try and impress them, the cool kids, and actually has aspirations of being a professional skateboarder, but gives up when he sees another kid who is better than himself. He goes through a similar phase with hacky sacking, and for the same reason. Rather than talk to the cool kids, he simply goes up to the ones playing with hacky sack and starts showing them his skills. At age 10, he goes on a camping trip with his 5th grade class, and when he is told that he will be sleeping in a tent, begs to be put in a cabin and is lodged with older boys who talk about attractive women and look at a magazine of beautiful model women. He doesn't specify if this is pornography or not, and says that at the time he was not yet interested in women, but pretended to be so that he would seem cool. At age 11, Elliot enrolls at Pinecrest Middle School, and the girls are generally pleasant with him and even speak to him in passing, mostly older 7th and 8th grade girls. Nevertheless, he feels contempt for the boys they choose to give their affection to. He begins to realize that girls give their affection to jerks, not gentlemen. He even takes dance classes and finds that girls enjoy dancing with him. He claims this is his only enjoyable time that he's ever had with girls, but he said that about Maddie already as well. James Ellis's mother dies of breast cancer. Elliot is outwardly distraught over this, while James remains stoic and solemn. Due to a change in child support, Elliot's mother moves to a smaller home, and a friend teases him for having a poor house, and this gets Elliot more teasing at school. At age 11, he starts using the internet and socializing on AOL chat rooms. After a time, this is when he is first exposed to pornography, when he's randomly sent images of nude women.
One friend who I met through a chat room suddenly emailed me pictures of beautiful naked girls, telling me to check this out. When I looked at the pictures, I was shocked beyond belief. I had never seen what beautiful girls looked like naked, and the sight filled me with strong and overwhelming emotions. I didn't know what was happening to me. Was it the first inkling of sexual desire in my body? I was traumatized. My childhood was fading away. Ominous fear swept over me, and I stopped talking to that person.
It's certainly understandable that a young boy would have mixed feelings about seeing a naked woman for the first time, but I was genuinely intrigued that he found it so universally negative. I personally can recall appreciating the female form as early as age 8, and I know I saw female nudity on HBO for the first time around 10. It only ever struck me as a totally positive thing. Sure, my heart raced and my face got hot, but that was more excitement. It's utterly bizarre that Elliot was so consistently scared and offended by the female form. Although Elliot was in and out of therapy his whole life, he seems to have kept his sexual feelings extremely hidden, and by his own admission, he kept his plans for the massacre expressly hidden from his therapists. At this point, Elliot got into Xbox and Halo, stepping up his interest in video games. It's curious to note that in the course of the manifesto, he frequently diverts into descriptions of his experiences with video games that seem to depart completely from the realm of the sad, bitter reflection and become devoted to gamer fandom. It's remarkable that even during the dark final stages of his life in which he wrote this document, he still gets lost in the joys of gamer culture, remembering tiny details like the limited edition flavor of Mountain Dew that was created as a Halo product tie-in. At camp, he experiences what he describes as a horrible, traumatic event. He bumps into a pretty girl. She turns around and cusses at him and pushes him back. This ridiculously unimportant event, which most people would likely forget seconds after it happened, instead leaves Elliot so traumatized that he sits in his cabin crying for extended periods. Predictably, he keeps his eye on the girl and is hateful when she gives her attention to someone he doesn't like. By 7th grade, Elliot has become extremely judgmental of the people around him, even if they have nothing to do with him. For example, of one student, he says,
I would always view Patrick Dibb as an obnoxious, rude lout. He was very ugly, too, and it annoyed me that he carried himself around as if he wasn't a freckled, chubby-faced imbecile.
With this cold, disdainful tone for most of the people he knows, coupled with the ambiguous placement of responsibility for fights he was involved in, it's difficult to accept Elliot's premise that he was bullied. He was generally ignored, it seems, and his misanthropic view comes largely from a lack of attention and exaltation, rather than any outward animosity from others. In his 13th year, he talks about seeing hardcore pornography for the first time while at a cyber cafe. He says,
One time while I was alone at Planet Cyber, I saw an older teenager watching pornography. I saw in detail a video of a man having sex with a hot girl. The video showed him stick his penis inside a girl's vagina. I didn't know anything about sex at the time. I barely even knew what sex was. I was slowly starting to develop sexual feelings for hot girls, but I didn't know what to do with them. To see this video really traumatized me. I had no idea what I was seeing. I couldn't imagine human beings doing such things to each other. The sight was shocking, traumatizing, and arousing. All of these feelings mixed together took a great toll on me. I walked home and cried by myself for a bit. I felt too guilty about what I saw to talk to my parents about it. I was quite shaken for a few days. This was among the very first glimpses I had of sex. Finding out about sex is one of the things that truly destroyed my entire life. Sex. The very word fills me with hate. Once I hit puberty, I would always want it like any other boy. I would always hunger for it. I would always covet it. I would always fantasize about it, but I would never get it. Not getting any sex is what will shape the very foundation of my miserable youth. This was a very dark day. Soon enough, I would inevitably find out about what sex was, whether I saw that foul video or not. Boys at my school started talking about it. Connor Hanrahan and his friend Jordan Carlton one day told me exactly what happens when a man and a woman have sex. Finding out about sex was just the beginning of my horrific downfall.
From the very beginning, he seems to have viewed sexual desire as some sort of affliction. Before he hit puberty, he was already wanting attention from girls, not receiving it, and being angry at the guys they chose. For this reason, it's difficult to conclude that the onset of puberty or exposure to sexually explicit materials could have had a motive power in what happened. It was in his 13th year that Elliot Rodger discovered World of Warcraft and, with his dad's help, set up a character. The game would come to dominate an increasingly significant amount of his time, to the point that it would become virtually his only activity. Elliot started getting teased by girls at school, naming one Monette Moio as outstanding among them. Examiner.com's article on the matter casts further doubt on Elliot's account, pointing out that Monette Moio was only 10 years old at the time. Additionally, Rodger has expressed disdain for Moio's brother Ashton for being popular, but their father reports that he wasn't overly popular in school. Elliot does admit in his writing that he had a crush on Monette, and this likely contributed to his delusions. Periodically, Elliot would have to go to Morocco with Somaya for extended periods, and this was always met with tantrums throughout the increasingly pathetic manifesto. He resents Somaya for her strict nature and the fact that she does things like limit the amount of time he can play World of Warcraft. While in Morocco, another boy shows him pornography. He says,
At one time, towards the end of the trip, when I had a sleepover with Ayman at Soyama's father's house, he showed me some European porn videos in the middle of the night. I could observe the act of sex in much more detail than that one glimpse I had at Planet Cyber. I didn't want to look, but my curiosity got the better of me. To see a video of human beings doing such weird and unspeakable things with each other revolted me. I couldn't understand what I was seeing, and yet I noticed I was feeling aroused. I felt desire to do those things, to have sex with the naked women in the video. It was a funny feeling that overwhelmed my body. I could feel my penis getting hard. This is when I noticed that I was finally going through puberty. Heavens save me.
It is here that we see Elliot again dealing with sex almost in a manner of total revulsion. It's reasonable, again, that a boy his age would have mixed feelings, but while Elliot's peers are expressing widespread excitement about the idea of sex, Elliot regards it with considerable trepidation. I don't think the excitement the other boys expressed is bravado either. I can remember being 14, and sex was never something that seemed at all repulsive to me, nor was it so off-putting to my peers. Since the shooting, speculation has run rampant on the internet, including the idea that Elliot was a repressed homosexual, a pedophile, etc. The ultimate truth of Elliot's psyche is splattered all over a car in Santa Barbara, but what is clear is that there is something fundamental to Elliot that differentiates his feelings on sex. Despite claiming to want nothing more than to lose his virginity, one is left to speculate what that would have been like. Would he have been repulsed by a nude woman in the act of penetrating her as he was repulsed by pornography? We will never know. Ultimately, however, Elliot's manifesto leaves the reader with the impression that his desire for love and sex proceeds from a pre-existing desire for attention and social validation. Further of note is that Elliot actually begs his parents to put him in an all-boys school so that he won't have to deal with girls, and they go along with it. For all his proclamations, Elliot is terrified of actually being anywhere near the female of the species. Elliot cried in the car on his first day of high school. He didn't make any friends because of the, quote, brutality of the world, though a cursory reading reveals that, as usual, he was immediately filled with contempt for everyone else at the school from the get-go. It's not long before Elliot is being teased by 12th graders and getting food thrown at him at lunch. Additionally, he talks about kids stealing things from him to laugh at him as he tries to get it back. Elliot's lack of self-awareness is stunning. At no point does he stop and consider that maybe this widespread disdain is the result of him being an obnoxious prick. He discovers masturbation and feels guilty when he does it. Curiously, he doesn't seem to develop much of an interest in pornography. He says at one point that he doesn't know how to access porn websites and settles for just finding pictures of, quote, hot girls. Later, he gets caught looking at so-called hot girls on his laptop and lies to his mother that he found it by accident. This lack of any real interest in porn is curious. He was 14 in 2005, meaning that internet porn was already in full bloom, and according to Gail Dines, he would have been able to find a limitless supply of degrading, body-punishing gonzo pornography simply by typing porn into Google. Predictably, Elliot's views on sex and relationships continue to go downhill, and he believes that he will never be worthy of it. He takes to hiding and crying at school every day and recalls one incident that was supposed to be especially traumatic, saying,
"The very last day of ninth grade was the worst. I was having PE at the gym, and one of my obnoxious classmates named Jesse was bragging about having sex with his girlfriend. I defiantly told him that I didn't believe him, so he played me a voice recording of what sounded like him and his girlfriend having sex. I could hear the girl saying his name over and over again while she panted frantically. He grinned at me smugly. I felt inferior to him, and I hated him. It was at that moment that I was called to the office. When I got there, my mother was waiting to take me home. I cried heavily as I told her about what happened earlier. That was the last day I ever set foot in Crespi Carmelite High School."
By this point in the reading, I was just perplexed. Did his mother not think that there was something odd about a teenage boy who cries when he hears people having sex? Did she ever talk to him about his feelings? Apparently not. His parents' reaction to his latest crying fit is to take him out of that school and put him in another. This one, co-ed. Of the experience, he says,
"I was completely and utterly alone. No one knew me or extended a hand to help me. I was an innocent, scared little boy trapped in a jungle full of malicious predators, and I was shown no mercy. Some boys randomly pushed me against the lockers as they walked past me in the hall. One boy who was tall and had blonde hair called me a loser right in front of his girlfriends. Yes, he had girls with him. Pretty girls. And they didn't seem to mind that he was such an evil bastard. In fact, I bet they liked him for it. This is how girls are, and I was starting to realize it. This was what truly opened my eyes to how brutal the world is. The most meanest and depraved of men come out on top, and women flock to these men. Their evil acts are rewarded by women, while the good, decent men are laughed at. It is sick, twisted, and wrong in every way. I hated the girls even more than the bullies because of this. The sheer cruelty of the world around me was so intense that I will never recover from the mental scars. Any experience I have ever had before never traumatized me as much as this."
This is where it truly becomes bizarre, as though it weren't already. Being pushed into your locker by popular boys as they walk by with their girlfriends has got to be one of the most common cliche bullying moves known to man. When I was around his age, I got beaten unconscious by a bully, and when I came to, I couldn't see out of one eye. And that's just one example. Being called a loser and pushed against a locker, that's a mild annoyance compared to what I've been witness to and victim of. And there's probably millions of people in this country alone that have had worse. It almost starts to sound like Elliot wanted to be a victim of bullying and inflated his perception of these rather mundane slights for that purpose. As we will see, he turns into very much the bully himself, and when he finally does get his ass beat, he regards it as the tipping point at which he knows he must kill. Elliot's time at this current school ends predictably.
I couldn't do it anymore. On the morning before the second week of Taft started, I broke down and cried in front of my mother, begging her not to make me go to that horrible place. I was so scared that I felt physically sick. I continued crying in the car on the way there, and my mother gave in. Instead of taking me to school, we went to the cafe at Gelson's in Calabasas, where we had a big talk. I tried to explain how much I was suffering there. She just could not take me to school after that. When we finished with Gelson's, she drove me to my father's house and told him about what happened. They agreed to take me out of Taft.
Once again, Elliot's mother gives in because her now 15-year-old son breaks down and cries, and yet again, rather than teach their son to confront his problems, they shuffle him off to another school, this one a homeschool where he goes for a few hours a day, and then the rest is done at home. Predictably, he hates nearly all of the kids there the moment he arrives and regards them as slobs. Furthermore, he has to suffer the humiliation of riding the bus. Yes, the bus, in case there was still any doubt in your mind that this was perhaps the world's most spoiled and stuck up of sociopaths. Around this time, his father begins to work on Oh My God, which eventually ruins him financially. When that eventually happens, Elliot expresses no concern for his father, but instead disdain that his father is putting him through all of this. Of course, in reality, it doesn't affect his affluent lifestyle that much at all. He saves his little brother Jazz from drowning at a pool party, and it's one of the few kind gestures he describes himself doing for another person. Ominously, he seems to take a dark pleasure in knowing that everything his brother experiences from that point on is the result of what he did that day. By 16, Elliot is still referring to the occasions he gets together with friends as playdates. He's afraid to drive and doesn't even start learning, saying that driving is something adults do, and he still feels like a child. He gives no thought to his future and lives for playing World of Warcraft and nothing else. At family get-togethers, he believes that the other boys are getting on better with the girls and starts having crying fits in front of them. During this time, his father takes in an older exchange student from France named Max, the son of a wealthy European hotel magnate. It's interesting here that this is one of the few people Elliot seems to have an actual connection with, an actual relationship with. They sit up playing cards and drinking beer, and Elliot remarks that he actually feels normal and comfortable around Max. Max even goes so far as to invite Elliot to come visit him in France. He meets all of Max's friends, and they go out drinking and partying all over town. Then Max introduces Elliot to a number of the women he slept with, and Elliot immediately withdraws into himself and starts brooding, wondering why it can't be him getting to have sex with all of these beautiful women. At this point in the reading, I was truly flabbergasted. Why doesn't he ask Max to try and help get him laid? Here he is in France with the son of a wealthy hotel owner who is introducing him to this stable of beautiful women, and the thought just apparently never crosses his mind to ask. He just gets lost in contempt for Max. How self-absorbed do you have to be when someone flies you across the globe to party with them, then introduces you to a bunch of beautiful women, and you get filled with contempt? At best, Elliot concludes that he has a begrudging respect for Max. Yeah, fuck you too, kid. The answer to why he never asks Max to help him get laid may be contained in a later event where his parents set him up with two life coaches, one a man who he hates because the guy is popular with women, and another a beautiful blonde woman just a year or so older than Elliot himself. He says he actually does enjoy talking to her, but can't get over the fact that she's just being paid to be nice to him, and remarks that this is why he would never go to a prostitute, because it's not a woman who has genuine interest in him. Perhaps he saw Max's girls in much the same light, or it just never occurred to him. From here, his manifesto descends into lengthy and repetitive diatribes about women as the enemy and sex as something that he's being cruelly denied. He begins developing an interest in fascism and longs for a world where he has the power to control everyone and deny them sex the same way he's been denied. This is very telling. He's not interested in a world where he is in charge so that he can force women to have sex with him. He's interested in a world where he can make everyone else suffer as he thinks he's suffered. His interest isn't in sex. It's in throwing a big, huge temper tantrum and making everybody else feel sorry for him. He accomplished one of those two things. Elliot has to spend the summer in Morocco with his stepmother, but after a few weeks there, he gets on the phone crying to his mom and she comes and gets him. He gets to a point where he cannot be around young couples without breaking down and crying. Finally, around age 17, he decides he wants to make his life better, so he gets a nice haircut and goes shopping for new clothes. This, and eventually he gets his driver's license, are the only things he does to better himself. He applies all of this by sitting around in various places waiting for girls to come up and talk to him. They never do, and he always starts crying. At 17, at 18, at 19, on and on, page after page of this crap. He enrolls at Pierce College at age 18, takes exactly one class, and drops out because there's no girls that will talk to him. Remember, he still isn't trying to go up and talk to them. He seems to think that he's supposed to just sit there and have girls come up to him if he's dressed nicely enough. Honestly, if I saw somebody sitting by themselves in a public area dressed nicely, I would assume they were waiting for their date and not bother them. At one point, a gang of thugs starts throwing eggs at him from a car and he throws one back. They get out to fight and they flee when he pulls out a knife. This is the first time we see him take up for himself. He starts weightlifting but doesn't go into much detail about the progress he makes. Dad finally teaches him how to drive. He sees Maddie again several times as an adult, and he becomes angry because she's now a hot blonde girl, the very thing he despises, and he now considers her an enemy. He reads extensively on fascism and starts dressing very conservatively. He becomes angry at his mother when she tells him that he has to get a job. He asks one of his life coaches to help him find a job, and he gets one. Then he's aghast to get there and realize it's a janitorial job at an airport. He writes of the event as if it's some horrendous tragedy that we, the reader, are expected to understand. He walks off the job after a few hours. He enrolls at Moore Park College, same song and dance as the last college. He can't be anywhere, including classrooms, that have young couples in them because he'll start crying, and he can't be near attractive women because they won't come talk to him, and that will make him start crying. He thinks that writing a successful screenplay might help him get laid, but then reads on the internet how hard it is to be a successful screenwriter and gives up. Wait a minute. His father is a Hollywood director, and his mother is close personal friends with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. And he thinks he's going to have the same hard time that everybody else has selling a screenplay. Anyway, a story that was passed down ad nauseum on my father's side of the family as a parable to discourage laziness tells of a man who is so lazy he barely moves. The townsfolk grow weary of having to feed him by hand, and they decide to have him buried alive. They load him into a horse-drawn wagon that carries him to the grave, and in passing, a corn farmer runs up and says, "Wait, I have some corn here. You can eat it and they won't bury you." The lazy man looks at the farmer and says, "Is the corn shucked?" The farmer says, "No." So the lazy man looks to the driver of the horse that pulls the wagon and says, "Drive on." This pretty much summarizes Elliot Rodger to a T. It doesn't matter how many advantages you have in life if you don't take advantage of them. He lacked any concept of drive or ambition whatsoever and literally expected everything, even the outer reaches of success, to be bestowed upon him. Hence his later belief that winning the lottery was the only way he could ever attain happiness and success. At this point in the story, it's literally just the same thing over and over again. One exception is when he's walking down the beach one day and a pretty girl smiles at him. That makes him happy. Does he say anything to her? No, of course not. He just walks on without taking advantage of the moment. He literally won't do a single goddamn thing to actually meet women. It's all just standing around and hoping he gets fucked at some point. His father tries to help by giving him a copy of The Secret, and predictably it just reinforces his belief that if he sits around and thinks the right thoughts, everything will work out right. Then he becomes so invested in The Secret that he starts trying to use it to win the lottery, convinced that winning the lottery is the only thing that will ever make girls want to have sex with him. He loses thousands. On a side note, he thinks winning the lottery will make girls want to have sex with him, but he's unwilling to hire a prostitute. Does he not get the... Anyway. He loses thousands of dollars doing this and doesn't get why it isn't working. I personally think his dad would have done well to give him a copy of Atlas Shrugged, but I doubt any inspirational book would have helped this little pissant. So, his parents send him to school in Santa Barbara, and his mom sets him up in a nice condo. Of course, he thinks she's doing it to get rid of him. He ends the section of the manifesto saying,
"And so ends another era in my extraordinary and tragic life."
And in the immortal words of Inigo Montoya, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. So, once he's in Santa Barbara, he's traumatized by hearing people upstairs having sex. Then his racism surfaces when a black student tells him that he lost his virginity at 13 to a blonde girl. He throws orange juice in the guy's face, runs to his room to cry, and says,
"How could an inferior, ugly black boy be able to get a white girl and not me? I am beautiful, and I am half white myself. I am descended from British aristocracy. He is descended from slaves. I deserve it more." I tried not to believe his foul words, but they were already said, and it was hard to erase from my mind. If this was actually true, if this ugly black filth was able to have sex with a blonde white girl at the age of 13, while I've had to suffer virginity all of my life, then this just proves how ridiculous the female gender is. They would give themselves to this filthy piece of scum, but reject me? The injustice!
And then, as if echoing every article on Return of Kings, he says,
"Females truly have something mentally wrong with them. Their minds are flawed, and at this point in my life, I was beginning to see it. The more I explored my college town of Isla Vista, the more ridiculousness I witnessed. All of the hot, beautiful girls walked around with obnoxious, tough, jock-type men who partied all the time and acted crazy. They should be going for intelligent gentlemen such as myself. Women are sexually attracted to the wrong type of man. This is a major flaw in the foundation of humanity. It is completely and utterly wrong in every sense of the word. As these truths fully dawned on me, I became deeply disturbed by them. Deeply disturbed, offended, and traumatized."
Then he offers this little gem.
"When we sat down at our table, I saw a young couple sitting a few tables down the row. The sight of them enraged me to no end, especially because it was a dark-skinned Mexican guy dating a hot, blonde white girl. I regarded it as a great insult to my dignity. How could an inferior Mexican guy be able to date a white blonde girl while I was suffering as a lonely virgin? I was ashamed to be in such an inferior position in front of my father. When I saw the two of them kissing, I could barely contain my rage. I stood up in anger, and I was about to walk up to them and pour my glass of soda all over their heads. I probably would have if father wasn't there. I was seething with envious rage, and my father was there to watch it all. It was so humiliating. I wasn't the son I wanted to present to my father. I should be the one with the hot blonde girl making my father proud. Instead, my father had to watch me suffer in a pathetic position. Life is so cruel to me. When I said my farewell to father before he drove home, I felt absolutely miserable. Then I went back to my room and sulked for hours.
But wait, there's more.
Another incident happened on the following day near the same location. I went to the Starbucks at the Camino Real Marketplace by myself like I usually did every morning. I ordered my coffee and sat down on one of the chairs to relax. A few moments later, when I looked up from my drink, I saw a young couple standing in line. The two of them were kissing passionately. The boy looked like an obnoxious punk. He was tall and wore baggy pants. The girl was a pretty blonde. They looked like they were in the throes of passionate sexual attraction to each other, rubbing their bodies together and tongue-kissing in front of everyone. I was absolutely livid with envious hatred. When they left the store, I followed them into their car and splashed my coffee all over them. The boy yelled at me, and I quickly ran away in fear. I was panicking as I got into my car and drove off, shaking with rage-fueled excitement. I drove all the way to the Vons at the Fairview Plaza and spent 3 hours in my car trying to contain my tumultuous emotions. I had never struck back at my enemies before, and I felt a small sense of spiteful gratification for doing so. I hated them so much. Even though I splashed them with my coffee, he was still the winner. He was going home to have passionate, heavenly sex with his beautiful girlfriend, and I was going home to my lonely bedroom to sleep alone in my lonely bed. I had never felt so miserable and mistreated in my life. I cursed the world for condemning me to such suffering. I wanted to do horrible things to that couple. I wanted to inflict pain on all young couples. It was around this point in my life that I realized I was capable of doing such things. I would happily do such things. I was capable of killing them, and I wanted to. I wanted to kill them slowly, to strip the skins of their flesh. They deserved it. The males deserved it for taking the females away from me, and the females deserve it for choosing those males instead of me. Ever since I was 17, I often fantasized about becoming powerful and inflicting suffering upon everyone who has wronged me in the past, but I never thought I would actually do it. At this point, after going through so much suffering and injustice, all of my innocence had been swept away. The world had been cruel to me, and it molded me to become strong enough to actually have the capability of returning that cruelness to the world. I had never been a violent person in nature, but after building up so much hatred over the years, I realized that I wouldn't hesitate to kill or even torture my hated enemies if I was given the opportunity. I spent the next 5 days in my room trying to forget about the horrific experiences I had to go through.
The weird thing about all of this is that I keep forgetting that it's supposed to be the words of a mass murderer and instead get lost in just how pathetic it all is. It's less a manifesto and more of just a diaper party. What exactly at this point has been horrific? Does he mean the part where his parents give him everything he wants the minute he balls up his face and stomps his foot, or the part where he suffered extremely mild instances of teasing and bullying in high school? At 20 years old, nothing is better. Elliot is angry at his two roommates because they're Hispanic. He can't get along with them, so his mom comes and gets him transferred to a new room. He continues to wander around Isla Vista and running away crying when he sees attractive girls or girls with boyfriends. He does the coffee throwing thing on two girls that don't respond when he smiles at them, and he drives away before they can get his license plate number. Peter Rodger had worked as a second unit director on the Hunger Games, and as such, the family was invited to attend the premiere. He immediately hates director Gary Ross and his son. Elliot immediately hates director Gary Ross and his son for the social positions Elliot believes rightly belong to him and Peter. He goes to the after party for the premiere and hates the leading male talent from the movie for getting all the attention from the girls and ignoring him. Surprise. And is approached by an old school friend whom he speaks to briefly, then ducks away from. He also attends a private Katy Perry concert. During this time, he is similarly infuriated. He continues to lose money trying to win the lottery by applying The Secret and gets further inundated with New Age crap. James Ellis officially ends their friendship. One of the last most significant and most absurd moments of his 20th year comes when he is in a park and sees a group of attractive young men and women enjoying themselves. He is immediately infuriated and retaliates by going to a store, buying a super soaker, filling it with orange juice, coming back to the park and soaking the offending persons, then driving away before he gets hurt. At 21, he throws an epic tantrum in his apartment because he can't win the lottery. He starts going to a shooting range to practice his marksmanship and begins planning the so-called Day of Retribution. In the spring of 2013, he discovered PUAHate.com and begins posting there. His actual discussion of PUA hate in the manifesto was very brief. He tried to get his parents to look at the site to understand his situation, but they did not. It's unclear how many posts he put on the website, as it is now offline. At this point, the story becomes somewhat personal because PUA hate was curiously involved in something that happened to me. In 2009, I did some coverage of The Game by Neil Strauss, the book that brought the PUA community into the mainstream. My videos generated an enraged, hateful response from the so-called pickup community, and I received a backlash so severe that it would have put Anita Sarkeesian in a straitjacket. This manic backlash continues to this very day. Not long ago, I posted a video about pickup artists descending en masse on a mall in Canada and being made to leave. I was blunt and cold in my response, to be sure, but I got submerged in messages comparable to Elliot Rodger's garbage. One person even told me they were flagging the video for hate speech and that they hoped I would kill myself. They told me that about 1,000 times, literally. But back in 2009, I roused the ire of one of the people mentioned in Neil Strauss's book, and he took to lambasting me on his internet radio show. This went on for about a week, and the first couple of days were all right, but then he started getting creepy. He told me that he'd acquired my home address, telephone number, and other personal information. He began playing sounds of people being tortured while he talked about what he wanted to do to me. Then he mentioned one of his listeners by name that lived near me and said that he wanted that person to come to my house and harm me. At that point, I called the police, and he backed off immediately. I'm not going to say his name because he's actually abandoned his radio show shortly thereafter, and he's now trying to lead a more private life. Nevertheless, it's my personal entry into the seething underbelly of the pickup artist community. The Southern Poverty Law Center now recognizes pickup artists on the whole as a hate group. I disagree with this wide-reaching net. I think professional PUAs like Mystery Matador, Ross Jeffries, etc. are snake oil salesmen out to part a fool from his money, and I think most of the people that take their classes are well-meaning rubes that have been hooked by a bullshit sales pitch. It's difficult to say that these people are a hate group in the manner of the KKK or the White Aryan Resistance, but the underbelly, such as PUAHate.com, is now unquestionably a hate group in motive and practice. Elliot Rodger may have only been the first terrorist attack in the name of this cause, and I sincerely hope he's also the last. But the show of support he's received in the time since the attack indicates that there are still enough people rallied around a common cause that share his sentiments to consider this a hate group. We'll discuss how to deal with this later. But back to Elliot. It's relevant that we now look at the event which he identifies as the tipping point, cementing his plans for the Day of Retribution. He writes,
There were about 100 people at that party. Everyone was socializing with a group of friends except for me. I walked around in my drunken confidence for a few moments, helped myself to the beer they had, and tried to act like a normal partygoer. I soon became frustrated that nobody was paying attention to me, particularly the girls. I saw girls talking to other guys who looked like obnoxious slobs, but none of them showed any interest in me. As my frustration grew, so did my anger. I came across this Asian guy who was talking to a white girl. The sight of that filled me with rage. I always felt as if white girls thought less of me because I was half Asian, but then I see this white girl at the party talking to a full-blooded Asian. I never had that kind of attention from a white girl, and white girls are the only girls I'm attracted to, especially the blondes. How could an ugly Asian attract the attention of a white girl while a beautiful Eurasian like myself never had any attention from them? I thought with rage. I glared at them for a bit and decided I had been insulted enough. I angrily walked toward them and bumped the Asian guy aside, trying to act cocky and arrogant to both the boy and the girl. My drunken state got the better of me, and I almost fell over to the floor after a few minutes of this. They said something along the lines that I was very drunk and that I needed to get some water, so I angrily left them and went out to the front yard where the main partying happened. Rage fumed inside me as I realized that I just walked away from that confrontation, so I rushed back into the house and spitefully insulted the Asian before walking out again. I stood awkwardly in the front yard for a bit, realizing how pathetic I looked all by myself when everyone was partying around me. To calm down, I climbed up onto a wooden ledge that bordered the street and plunged down in one of the chairs there. Isla Vista was at its wildest state at the time, and I saw lots of guys walking around with hot blonde girls on their arm. It fueled me with rage, as it always had. I should be one of those guys, but no blonde girls gave me the chance. I looked down at all of them, and in my drunken carelessness extended my arm out and pretended to shoot them all, laughing giddily as I did. Eventually, some partiers climbed up onto the ledge. They were all obnoxious, rowdy boys whom I've always despised. A couple of pretty girls came up with them and talked to them, but not me. They all started socializing right next to me, and none of the girls paid any attention to me. I rose from my chair and tried to act arrogant and cocky towards them, throwing insults at everyone. They only laughed at me and started insulting me back. That was the last straw. I had taken enough insults for that night. A dark, hate-fueled rage overcame my entire being, and I tried to push as many of them as I could from the 10-foot ledge. My main target was the girls. I wanted to punish them for talking to the obnoxious boys instead of me. It was one of the most foolish and rash things I ever did, and I almost risked everything in doing it, but I was so drunk with rage that I didn't care. I failed to push any of them from the ledge, and the boys started to push me, which resulted in me being the one to fall to the street. When I landed, I felt a snap in my ankle, followed by a stinging pain. I slowly got up and found that I couldn't even walk. I had to stumble, and stumble I did. I tried to get away from there as fast as I could. As I stumbled a few yards down Del Playa with my shattered leg, I realized that someone had stolen my Gucci sunglasses that my mother had given me. I loved those sunglasses and had to get them back. I vehemently turned around and staggered back towards the party. At that point, I was so drunk that I forgot where the party was and ended up walking onto the front yard of the house next to it, demanding to know who took my sunglasses. The people in this house must have been friends with the ones I previously fought with, for they greeted me with vicious hostility. They called me names like faggot and pussy, typical things those types of scumbags would say. And a whole group of the obnoxious brutes came up and dragged me onto their driveway, pushing and hitting me. I wanted to fight and kill them all. I managed to throw one punch toward the main attacker, but that only caused them to beat me even more. I fell to the ground where they started kicking me and punching me in the face. Eventually, some other people from the street broke up the fight. I managed to have the strength to stand up and stagger away. It was the first time in my life that I had been truly beaten up physically to the point where my face was bruised up. I had suffered a lot of bullying in my life, but most of it wasn't physical. I had never been beaten and humiliated that badly. Everyone in Isla Vista saw what happened, and it was truly horrific. The worst part of this whole ordeal was not getting beaten up. Oh no, it was the fact that no one showed any concern. There was only one group of people that helped me to the end of Del Playa, but after that they abandoned me. One girl offered to help me as I stumbled home with a broken leg, beaten and bloody. If girls had been attracted to me, they would have offered to walk me to my room and take care of me. But they would have even offered to sleep with me to make me feel better. But no one girl showed an ounce of concern for me. They didn't care. No one cared about me. I was alone. As I got to my room, I was so traumatized that I called the only people in the world I knew, my parents and my sister. Yes, I even called my sister someone I never got along with. I sulked for a long time, then reached up to my neck to feel my special golden necklace and felt nothing there. In the midst of the fight, one of those horrible punks had snatched off my golden necklace that my grandma, Amma, had given me. The necklace was one of the most special items I ever had, and now one of those evil, wretched thugs will be selling it to buy drugs. I broke down in anguish and wailed in agony, crying and crying until I passed out in my bed all alone.
Okay, so the reason I was busting up a little bit there as I was reading it is because, my God, he first of all, there's this girl that offers to help him and he won't take it, but then he complains that no girl will fuck him to make him feel better. My God, I mean, do you think fucking is some kind of power-up or something? Anyway. Here we see the complete detachment from any sense of responsibility. He initiates a fight by trying to push women off of a balcony, then acts like he's the one who got bullied, and then thinks he's further insulted when nobody has any sympathy for them. He has no ability to understand that he got everything he had coming to him that night. If he'd received more regular beatings like that, he might have eventually gotten the sociopathic narcissism stomped out of him once and for all. His brain, as warped as it was, might have been eventually snapped in the other direction, stunting him as a humble submissive. Elliot was prescribed risperidone, which is an antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenics and manic depressives, as well as irritability symptoms in children with autism spectrum disorders. Unfortunately, Elliot refused to take the medication, and the one thing that might have actually helped his condition never came to fruition. You can't help somebody that doesn't want to be helped, and this is totally true of Elliot Rodger. So what does his mommy do for him? She buys him a BMW 3 Series coupe. Yes, this rotten child that can't function in public without breaking down in tears gets a new car. This will factor into my conclusion on the matter as well. Then he discovers his sister has a boyfriend. I had wondered as I read the manifesto what his reaction would be to his sister dating, and given the fact that she's a stone fox, it was highly likely that she'd lose her virginity. Well, here's Elliot's comments.
To my extreme rage, I discovered that my sister now had a boyfriend and that she had lost her virginity. She had casually dated boys in the past, but never to the serious extent that she did with this one. This one was half white, half Mexican, named Samuel, and I immediately took an intense disliking to him when I was first introduced to him. He seemed like the typical obnoxious slob that most young girls are sexually attracted to. Georgia invited him into my mother's house all the time, and it angered me to watch him lurking about, eating my mother's food and drinks, and making use of my mother's house. He was freeloading off my mother, and she didn't even realize it. I eventually grew to hate him after I heard him have sex with my sister. I arrived at the house one day, my mother being at work, and heard the sounds of Samuel plunging his penis into my sister's vagina through her closed room door, along with my sister's moans. I stood there and listened to it all. So my sister, who is 4 years younger than me, managed to lose her virginity before I did. It reminded me of how pathetic I was, that at the age of 22, I was still a virgin. I hated her boyfriend as well. My sister said that he's been with other girls before her, and I'm sure he lost his virginity at a much younger age. It's such an injustice. The slob doesn't even have a car, and he's able to get girlfriends while I drive a BMW and get no attention from girls whatsoever. My sister even showed me a picture of one of his ex-girlfriends, a pretty brunette white girl. My hatred towards him only intensified after that. I refused to speak to him whenever he came over, and I constantly pestered my mother to ban him from the house, but she refused to heed my demands. Even worse, she constantly talked about him admiringly. He reminded me of Leo Bubenheim, a typical obnoxious boy who has been able to experience a great sex life from a young age. An enemy had now infiltrated the house of my mother, the one place in the whole world where I've always sought refuge from injustice. Things were getting too out of hand.
Well, that's exactly what I expected him to say. It's creepy as all fuck, and I don't think it warrants further comment. Let's move on to what he says about his actual plans for the day of retribution.
On the day before the day of retribution, I will start the first phase of my vengeance, silently killing as many people as I can around Isla Vista by luring them into my apartment through some form of trickery. The first people I would have to kill are my 2 housemates to secure the entire apartment for myself as my personal torture and killing chamber. After that, I will start luring people into my apartment, knock them out with a hammer, and slit their throats. I will torture some of the good-looking people before I kill them, assuming that the good-looking ones had the best sex lives. All of that pleasure they had in life, I will punish them by bringing them pain and suffering. I have lived a life of pain and suffering, and it was time to bring that pain and suffering to people who actually deserve it. I will cut them, flay them, strip all the skin off their flesh, and pour boiling water all over them while they are still alive, as well as any other form of torture I could possibly think of. When they are dead, I will behead them and keep their heads in a bag, for their heads will play a major role in the final phase. This first phase will represent my vengeance against all of the men who have had pleasurable sex lives while I've had to suffer. Things will be fair once I make them suffer as I did. I will finally even the score. The second phase will take place on the day of retribution itself, just before the climactic massacre. The second phase will represent my war on women. I will punish all females for the crime of depriving me of sex. They have starved me of sex my entire youth and gave that pleasure to other men. In doing so, they took many years of my life away. I cannot kill every single female on Earth, but I can deliver a devastating blow that will shake all of them to the core of their wicked hearts. I will attack the very girls who represent everything I hate in the female gender, the hottest sorority at UCSB. After doing a lot of extensive research within the last year, I found out that the sorority with the most beautiful girls is Alpha Phi sorority. I know exactly where their house is, and I've sat outside it in my car to stalk them many times. Alpha Phi sorority is full of hot, beautiful blonde girls, the kind of girls I've always desired, but was never able to have because they all look down on me. They are all spoiled, heartless, wicked bitches. They think they are superior to me, and if I ever tried to ask one on a date, they would reject me cruelly. I will sneak into their house at around 9 p.m. on the day of retribution, just before all of the partying starts, and slaughter every single one of them with my guns and knives. If I have time, I will set their whole house on fire. Then we shall see who the superior one really is. The final phase of the day of retribution will be my ultimate showdown on the streets of Isla Vista. On the morning before, I will drive down to my father's house to kill my little brother, denying him of the chance to grow up to surpass me along with my stepmother, Somaya, as she will be in the way. My father will be on one of his business trips, so thankfully I won't have to deal with him. If he didn't go away on that trip, I might even have to postpone the whole plan because of my fear that I might hesitate if I have to kill him. Once I've taken care of my brother and stepmother, I will switch over to the Mercedes SUV and drive it back up to Isla Vista. I will use it as one of my killing machines against my enemies. An SUV will cause a lot more damage than my BMW coupe. After I have killed all of the sorority girls at the Alpha Phi house, I will quickly get into the SUV before the police arrive, assuming they would arrive within 3 minutes. I will then make my way to Del Playa, splattering as many of my enemies as I can with the SUV and shooting anyone who doesn't splatter. I can only imagine how sweet it will be to ram the SUV into all of those groups of popular young people who I've always witnessed walking right in the middle of the road as if they are better than everyone else. When they are writhing in pain, their bodies broken and dying after I splatter them, they will fully realize their crimes. Once I reach Del Playa Street, I will dump the bag of severed heads I had saved from my previous victims, proclaiming to everyone how much I've made them suffer. Once they see all of their friends' heads roll into the street, everyone will fear me as the powerful god I am. I will then start massacring everyone on Del Playa Street. I will pull up next to a house party and fire bullets at everyone partying on the front yard. I will specifically target the good-looking people and all of the couples. After I have destroyed a house party, I will continue down Del Playa, destroying everything and everyone. When I see the first police car come to their rescue, I will drive away as fast as I can, shooting and ramming anyone in my path until I find a suitable place to finally end my life. To end my life, I will quickly swallow all of the Xanax and Vicodin pills I have left, along with an ample amount of hard liquor. Immediately after imbibing this mixture, I will shoot myself in the head with 2 of my handguns simultaneously. If the gunshots don't kill me, the deadly drug mixture will. I will not suffer being captured and sent to prison. I must plan this very efficiently. Nothing can go wrong. It needs to be perfect. This is now my sole purpose on this world. My plans will come to fruition, and I mustn't let anyone stop me.
Well, he accomplished some of that, and at least he didn't succeed with all of it. Finally, and most importantly, we must consider his epilogue, which is the part of his writing that could constitute a manifesto.
And that is how my tragic life ends. Who would have thought my life would turn out this way? I didn't. There was a time when I thought this world was a good and happy place. As a child, my whole world was innocent. It wasn't until I went through puberty and started desiring girls that my whole life turned into a living hell. I desired girls, but girls never desired me back. There is something very wrong with that. It is an injustice that cannot go unpunished. There is no way I could live a happy life with such a scenario. Not only did I have to waste my entire youth suffering in loneliness and unfulfilled desire, but I had to live with the knowledge that other boys my age were able to have all of the experiences I craved for. It is absolutely unfair and unjust. In addition, I had to suffer the shame of other boys respecting me less because I didn't get any girls. Everybody knew I was a virgin. Everyone knew how undesirable I was to girls, and I hated everyone just for knowing it. I want people to think that girls adore me. I want to feel worthy. There is no pride in living as a lonely, unwanted outcast. I couldn't even call it living. I am not meant to live such a pathetic, miserable life.
That is not my place in this world. I will not bow down and accept such a horrific fate. If humanity will not give me a worthy place among them, then I will destroy them all. I am better than all of them. I am a god! Exacting my retribution is my way of proving my true worth to the world. In the midst of my suffering, I have been able to see the world much clearer than others. I have vision that other people lack. Through my suffering, I have been able to see just how twisted and wrong this world really is. The current state of humanity is what makes it wrong. I look at the human race and see only vileness and depravity, all because of an act known as sexuality. Sex is by far the most evil concept in existence. The fact that life itself exists through sex just proves that life is flawed. The act of sex gives human beings a tremendous amount of pleasure. Pleasure they don't deserve. No one deserves to experience so much pleasure, especially since some humans get to experience it while some are denied it. When a man has sex with a beautiful woman, he probably feels like he is in heaven. But the world is not supposed to be heaven. For some humans to actually be able to feel such heights of heavenly pleasure is selfish and hedonistic. The ultimate evil behind sexuality is the human female. They are the main instigators of sex. They control which men get it and which men don't. Women are flawed creatures, and my mistreatment at their hands has made me realize the sad truth. There is something very twisted and wrong with the way their brains are wired. They think like beasts, and in truth, they are beasts. Women are incapable of having morals or thinking rationally. They are completely controlled by their depraved emotions and vile sexual impulses. Because of this, the men who do get to experience the pleasures of sex and the privilege of breeding are the men who women are sexually attracted to. The stupid, degenerate, obnoxious men. I have observed this all my life. The most beautiful women choose to mate with the most brutal of men instead of magnificent gentlemen like myself. Women should not have the right to choose who to mate and breed with. That decision should be made for them by rational men of intelligence. If women continue to have rights, they will only hinder the advancement of the human race by breeding with other degenerate men and creating stupid, degenerate offspring. This will cause humanity to become even more depraved with each generation. Women have more power in human society than they deserve, all because of sex. There is no creature more evil and depraved than the human female. Women are like a plague. They don't deserve to have any rights. Their wickedness must be contained in order to prevent future generations from falling to degeneracy. Women are vicious, evil, barbaric animals, and they need to be treated as such. In fully realizing these truths about the world, I have created the ultimate and perfect ideology of how a fair and pure world would work. In an ideal world, sexuality would not exist. It must be outlawed. In a world without sex, humanity will be pure and civilized. Men will grow up healthily without having to worry about such a barbaric act. All men will grow up fair and equal because no man will be able to experience the pleasures of sex while others are denied it. The human race will evolve to an entirely new level of civilization, completely devoid of all the impurity and degeneracy that exists today. In order to completely abolish sex, women themselves would have to be abolished. All women must be quarantined like the plague they are, so they can be used in a manner that actually benefits a civilized society. In order to carry this out, there must exist a new and powerful type of government under the control of one divine ruler, such as myself. The ruler that establishes this new order would have complete control over every aspect of society in order to direct it towards a good and pure place. At the disposal of this government, there needs to be a highly trained army of fanatically loyal troops in order to enforce such revolutionary laws. The first strike against women will be to quarantine all of them in concentration camps. At these camps, the vast majority of the female population will be deliberately starved to death. That would be an efficient and fitting way to kill them off. I would take great pleasure and satisfaction in condemning every single woman on Earth to starve to death. I would have an enormous tower built just for myself where I can oversee the entire concentration camp and gleefully watch them all die. If I can't have them, no one will. I'd imagine thinking to myself as I oversee this, women represent everything that is unfair in the world, and in order to make the world a fair place, they must be eradicated. A few more women would be spared, however, for the sake of reproduction. These women would be kept and bred in secret labs. There they will be artificially inseminated with sperm samples in order to produce offspring. Their depraved nature will slowly be bred out of them in time. Future generations of men will be oblivious to these remaining women's existence, and that is for their best. If a man grows up without knowing of the existence of women, there will be no desire for sex. Sexuality will completely cease to exist. Love will cease to exist. There will no longer be any imprint of such concepts in the human psyche. It is the only way to purify the world. In such a world, the man's mind can develop to greater heights than ever before. Future generations will live their lives free of having to worry about the barbarity of sex and women, which will enable them to expand their intelligence and advance the human race to a state of perfect civilization. It is a shameful pity that my ideal world cannot be created. I realized long ago that there is no way I could possibly rise to such a level of power in my lifetime with the way the world is now. Such a thing will never become a reality for me. But it did give me something to fantasize about, as I burned with hatred towards all women for rejecting me throughout the years. This whole viewpoint and ideology of abolishing sex stems from being deprived of it all my life. If I cannot have it, I will do everything I can to destroy it! My orchestration of the day of retribution is my attempt to do everything in my power to destroy everything I cannot have. All of those beautiful girls I've desired so much in my life, but can never have because they despise and loathe me, well, I will destroy. All of those popular people who live hedonistic lives of pleasure, I will destroy because they never accepted me as one of them. I will kill them all and make them suffer just as they have made me suffer. It is only fair. Why do things have to be this way? I'm sure that is the question everyone will be asking after the day of retribution is over. They will all be asking why. Indeed, why? That is the question I've had for everyone throughout all my years of suffering. Why was I condemned to live a life of misery and worthlessness while other men were able to experience the pleasures of sex and love with women? Why do things have to be this way? I ask all of you. All I ever wanted was to love women and in turn be loved by them back. Their behavior towards me has only earned my hatred, and rightfully so. I am the true victim in all of this. I am the good guy. Humanity struck at me first by condemning me to experience so much suffering. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to start this war. I wasn't the one who struck first, but I will finish it by striking back. I will punish everyone, and it will be beautiful. Finally, at long last, I can show the world my true worth!
Those killed by Elliot Rodger were Shang Huan James Hong, George Shin, Wei Han David Wong, Catherine Cooper, Veronica Weiss, and Christopher Michaels Martinez. Their deaths will be for nothing if we don't learn something from all of this. In times of tremendous national tragedy, it is commonplace for the populace to look for a single causal factor to be eliminated or heavily regulated to ensure that such a tragedy never happens again. This ultimately is a fool's errand. There is no way to curb the civil liberties of the innocent to the point that the criminal element is removed by extension. A prime example of this is the new charge to heighten gun control in light of the shooting, but that doesn't address the fact that 3 of the murders were done with a knife, and he also attempted to kill people with his car. The next argument, albeit less emphasized at present, is to do away with or heavily regulate the sale of violent video games. Again, this only punishes the innocent. Pornography barely enters into the equation since Elliot had only a cursory exposure to it, at least by his account. But these are the typical hobby horses. Owen, yes, I have seen Gail Dine's article in the Huffington Post, and I will be responding to it. But these are the typical hobby horses of the sacrificial collective that wants to cut off a pound of flesh as atonement, as though the innocent must bear punishment for the wrongdoers. Unique to this particular incident are the matters related to gender relations. Predictably, the feminists and social justice warriors have been scrambling to turn this into a springboard for their cause, with scumbags like Anita Sarkeesian, John McIntosh, and others attempting to tie this into a larger concept of patriarchy and misogyny. To John's claims, patriarchy, as you perceive it to exist, is only a theoretical concept that is built on a series of assumptions about men and women with no actual scientific data to support it. There was no competition going on between Elliot Rodger and other boys for women. Certainly not literally, but not figuratively as well. Rodger viewed himself as inherently superior to all men around him and deserving of all women by default. This is not true of one who views women as a prize to be won. In a competition, all competing parties go into the event knowing that there is a reward or desired outcome that must be attained. Rodger saw himself above that to the point that he honestly believed that he should have women coming to him without question. The other reality, John Boy, is that gaining the affection of one's love interest is a competition. It is a competition to make a deeper, more significant connection with another person in the face of their other romantic options, and it is a competition with yourself to improve yourself to the point of being worthy of love and affection. To your one tweet about calling this kid a misogynist, you are correct. He undoubtedly is, and I don't see anybody anywhere denying that. But do you not realize that this only demonstrates how absurd the feminist notion of misogyny actually is? Misogyny is not wanting to look at a naked woman. It's wanting to round up all the women in the world and put them into extermination camps. You social justice warriors have wasted so much time trying to make harmless activities like looking at pornography or going to strip clubs into these horrific bastions of hatred and oppression that you've lost sight of what a rare phenomenon misogyny actually is. You've tried to make misogyny an institutional concept based on no evidence whatsoever, but stop and look at the spread here. The only people showing up in support of Elliot Rodgers are the tiny handful of people from the PUA hate website and other extremist websites, while the overwhelming majority of people in this country view what happened as a horrific tragedy. We, as a society, view the random slaughter of the innocent as a horrible thing, regardless of the gender of the victims. You can accept that, or you can continue to be an asshole. To Anita's disgusting tweets. The fact that you would turn this real-life tragedy into a validation of your largely fictionalized agenda reveals you to be a hollow shell of a human being. But what's worse is that even if we were to assume everything you say is true, this still doesn't support your agenda. Elliot Rodger's beef was with women, period, not with keeping the internet a boys' club. This is, at best, you making a correlation-causation fallacy. But what's amazing is that you think all of your experiences are comparable to this at all. You have endured nothing more than people saying mean things, period. That's all it has been. Nobody has actually made an attempt on your life, and nobody has come, and you have come through all the horrors completely unscathed. If anything, this demonstrates just how lame your claims actually are. Even if we again grant that all of the backlash you received sprung up organically and wasn't the result of something you orchestrated, how does having a bunch of assholes say mean things to you on the internet stack up to this guy who actually went out and committed mass murder? It should also teach you something else. People who actually intend to kill other people don't usually tell them about it in advance. None of Elliot Rodger's victims saw it coming. He did not inform them beforehand. But the overarching feminist message, as encapsulated by this centermost tweet, no, not I nor any other man should be expected to assume responsibility for this, nor shall we concede that we all have an Elliot Rodger in us. Yes, we all have the capacity to do violence, and so do women. But the vast majority of us don't hate the ones that don't and are... But the vast majority of us don't, and the ones that don't are not obligated to pay the deficit of consideration for the ones that do. Men who do not perpetrate violent acts against women do nothing to protect women from the men who are violent criminals. The violent criminals certainly don't adopt this altruistic mindset, and existing nonviolent men do not magically influence world events by flagellating themselves. I have heard frequently the concept of the so-called Schrodinger's rapist, that women are expected to view all men as potential rapists until proven otherwise. Well, the problem with that logic is that you could say exactly the same thing, that all men are non-rapists until proven otherwise. You choose to privilege the perspective that assumes all men are rapists. And for what? so that you can continue to feel paranoid and oppressed. Wake up and look around you and see all of the people, men and women, all the people all over the country who are decrying this activity. This is not an outgrowth of the patriarchy. This is not an indication of some widespread misogyny. But more so, as a friend of mine, a woman, pointed out, if you continue to carry on in the way you have in the aftermath of this, you are only giving him what he wanted. All of this wild fear-mongering is exactly what Elliot Rodger hoped to instill, just as it is exactly what every terrorist hopes to instill in his targeted demographic. Do you not understand the truth of what was said, that if we give up our freedoms, if we become terrified, then the terrorists will win? If you want to see the absurdity of trying to make all men shoulder the burden, ask yourself if you feel obligated to acknowledge that all women have a little bit of Valerie Solanas in them. Now, if you are going to argue that Elliot Rodger's actions were the result of a society in which men see themselves as entitled to women, ask yourself if the reverse is true. Would you ever consider yourself morally obligated to acknowledge as a woman that this tragedy is the result of women withholding sex from men? Of course not, nor should you. So by the same token, don't ask men to shoulder a responsibility that has nothing to do with them. I turn now to the other side of the internet gender war, the manosphere. The MRAs have certainly been receiving an undue amount of accusation from feminists who are manipulating this into a counterstrike on the men's movement. This alone is inaccurate. The MRAs, as suggested by sites like A Voice for Men or Honey Badger Radio, have consistently sought to portray themselves as the passive sympathizers for men's difficulties and lack the militant aggression seen in Elliot Rodger's own behavior. Now, I disagree with the MRAs on many of their positions and consider their stance to be ill-founded, but the attack is misplaced. The greater focus should be given to the elements of the manosphere that advocate a return to patriarchal values. You who have offset your own shortcomings by declaring that women must be kept in line have presented Elliot Rodger with the pseudo-intellectual landscape which allowed him to maintain the contradictions in his thinking that led to his breakdown. You are free to continue to advocate for these positions. That is your right. And the blame for these events can only fall on Elliot Rodger in a just world. But what you cannot deny is that the philosophical mechanism that you foster, that a philosophy built on contradictory premises can only have disaster as its applied outcome, no matter the degree and devastation of that outcome. Ultimately, however, the femosphere, the manosphere, and the femosphere both must come to terms with their parallel nature. Both begin with a premise that declares one gender has been subjugated to the other throughout history, and that sexism will be resolved once their side has been properly advantaged. Neither will declare their battle to be against the opposing gender, but rather that they represent the one true course to the resolution of sexism, but both are so ideologically entrenched that they cannot step back and look at the bigger picture. Neither can see that they don't actually represent the interests of men or women, but rather that they attach themselves to the agenda, attach their agenda to external issues that they hold as emblematic of their cause, much as the various racist and white nationalist groups commit themselves heavily to the matter of illegal immigration, an issue which exists externally to their cause and ideology. Whether you are a member of the more militant arm or the passive arm of the gender war is irrelevant. The militant arms contend that girls are better than boys, or conversely boys are better than girls, and the passive arms declare the opposite, that boys are weaker than girls and vice versa. The problem is that whatever side you take, you are forced to take the opposite side by default. If you believe boys are weaker than girls, then you confess your belief in the strength of girls. If you believe that girls are weaker than boys, then you confess your belief in the strength of boys. Thus, it is a four-sided issue, and neither side can exist without contradicting the others. Do you see now why Elliot Rodger, a boy whose mind was filled with unresolved contradictions, could believe himself to be both superior and worthless at the same time? He had never come to understand the basic law of non-contradiction, that he cannot be at once superior and inferior in contrast to the same person. To glean the truth of the matter, he must apply the functioning of his mind to the nature of reality, which he never did. Ultimately, the problems in Elliot Rodger's mind and life that led to his actions are easy to lay out. Whatever the condition that he was born with, the psychosis that gave him his murderous disposition, the manner in which that psychosis manifested is obvious. First, he was born into privilege. This is not a good or bad thing per se, and his two other siblings have done just fine in the same circumstances. For Elliot, however, it fostered and contextualized his innate lack of empathy. Having no concept of genuine hardship, he believes that the frustrations and setbacks of his own life constitute horrendous crimes committed by the entirety of humanity. He has a father who is largely absent from his life, but whom he holds in towering godlike regard. By contrast, his mother spoils him to the point that he's able to get his way simply by throwing a temper tantrum. At all the critical points in his life, which he outlined in his manifesto, he got his way by crying to his mother. It was the only consistent method by which he dealt with the world. The ultimate spoiled little prince. His mother would gladly fly around the world to save her son from the excruciating torture of having to be bored in a foreign country. She transferred him from one school to the next when he endured the insufferable terror of hearing a recording of two of his classmates having sex or being pushed into his locker. At no point was he made to deal with his circumstances, and at every point he was made to feel weak and helpless. And that the only recourse was to throw a temper tantrum. This sad, pathetic state of being, precipitated by his parents and their belief that lavishing their son with expensive toys and snapping to attention every time there were tears in his eyes was acceptable parenting, stunted his existence to the point that as an adult, a psychotic, delusional, mentally imbalanced adult, he had not progressed past the first few years of life in terms of his coping mechanisms. He threw a fit and got what he wanted all throughout his life, and then when he finally began to reach adulthood, he began to realize that the rest of the world didn't feel inclined to accommodate his temper tantrums. What else could lead a fully grown adult to believe that trying to push women over a balcony didn't constitute responsibility as the aggressor in that situation? He was throwing a temper tantrum just as he was throwing a temper tantrum all those times he poured drinks on unsuspecting persons. And on May 24th, he threw the magnum opus of his temper tantrums. Yes, his parents had him in therapy all throughout his life, but they still failed to see the folly of their ways. They still believed that expensive toys and accommodating temper tantrums could raise their child. As Elliot Rodger came face to face with the cold, hard realities of life, it became readily apparent that the world at large would not yield to his crybaby routine. Consider that as much as he says he wants love from women, he doesn't express any actual understanding of what love is. Instead, he seems to view love as some kind of undivided attention that is to be handed over out of a sense of duty. Is there any wonder that in the course of the text he recalls being infuriated at his mother for not marrying a wealthy suitor, only to have her son tell her that if she loved him, she'd put his happiness before her own? We've identified the root of the problem in Elliot's world, but if you desire to learn what societal underpinnings, what values, or rather what failures of values, could have precipitated this tragedy, let us take a look back. Elliot Rodger was a small, delicate child that grew up enjoying a life of privilege due to the success of his father. He felt deeply insignificant next to his father's monumental achievements, and instead got lost in a warped illogical philosophy that eventually came to dominate his worldview to the point that he felt no guilt or remorse about doing things that were either criminal or at least morally repugnant. Who does that sound like? There's a remarkable similarity between Elliot Rodger and Venom Fang X. Many wonder why Thunderfoot, DPR Jones, myself, and others were in such strident opposition to Sean's behavior back when the legality and ethics of it all was strongly in question. Well, Sean is now a productive member of society. I happen to know that he's making an honest living and supporting himself in his endeavors, and while I don't agree with his views in the slightest, having him successfully integrated into a world where he is taking responsibility for his life allows him to proselytize his views without the air of megalomania that was overtaking him in his earlier incarnation. Elliot Rodger never had that realization, and look where it got him. I'm not saying that Sean would have ended up like that. I have no idea one way or the other. But what is undeniable is that both Sean and Elliot have similar personalities, similar life stories, and similar dispositions, and both came to the crossroads in their lives. One chose to deal with the world as an adult, and one chose to deal with the world as a petulant child. But still, that's not, as Anita Sarkeesian would say, a systemic big picture perspective. For that, we turn to the folks at True Forced Loneliness. Before the MRAs, before the Manosphere, before PUA hate, there was true forced loneliness, of movement cobbled together by a few internet shut-ins that sought to spread awareness of a widespread problem, namely that none of them could get laid or find love. They tried to express at length the pain of seeing happy, loving couples enjoying themselves while they wallowed in misery. Much of their philosophy was a precursor to the contemporary manosphere, arguing that feminism had created a world where women had too much power and were ruining the lives of men out of spite. I was very hard on them in my critique, and few people understood why. The answer is simple. They embody what Ayn Rand called hatred of the good for being good. They want unearned love and fail to understand that there is no such thing. Unearned love is just the performance of love, and if they were content with that, they could have hired a prostitute. Similarly, I was critical of the pickup artists because early on in their ruddy sham, I realized that this wasn't about getting laid. It was about social recognition and using women as a means to attain that recognition. After all, if sex was all you wanted, then an hour with a high-end prostitute would have cost a fraction of what was required to attend one of Mystery's seminars. Before PUA hate carried PUA ideas into the realm of hatred and misogyny, the standard PUA community was still fostering that very thought process that would put men on that road. And that leads us to today. If you wish to know what societal evil accommodated, encouraged, and preceded this behavior, I will tell you. It is an attitude more basic and more widespread than any of the philosophies or movements we've thus far discussed, and while it is one of the most poisonous, toxic beliefs in human history, it is one that we can overcome, not by banning various products or by curtailing civil liberties, but rather by simply shifting our attitudes. To understand what I'm referring to, listen to this clip from the comedian and podcasting superstar Adam Carolla.
There's something that's come up in this country that didn't used to exist, which is envy. And it's a big issue. And it was understood back in the day, and we are empowering, we're now dealing with the first wave of participation trophy. My own fecal matter doesn't stink, empowered. I feel so fucking good about myself. Everybody's a winner. There's no losers. We are dealing with the first wave of those fucking assholes. That's who we're dealing with now. Because this has been going on for about 25 years, and we're just starting to get maybe 20 years, and those kids were 8 or 9 years old. And we're getting the first...
Is that the millennials? I think that's the name for these.
I call them the ass douches.
That's that. Colloquially, they're known as the ass douches.
No, I saw that on the news.
Oh, okay.
That's
I stand corrected.
Yeah, Brian Williams called them the ass douches.
Right.
Yeah.
Bri White?
Hand of God. Hand of God. Hand of God. So what we have, I haven't really broken this down, but I'm going to try now. We created a bunch of fucking self-entitled monsters. And this has become the pursuit of my life, where people are so far out of it and what they expect and what they think realistic is and what the set of rules that pertains to them versus the other guys, because that's what the bottom line is. I want my most valuable player trophy. Well, you're the slowest, fattest guy on the team. Why should he get one and I don't get one? Because he busts his ass and he runs a 4.440. That's why he gets one. Well, this is bullshit. And then everyone gets involved, and then everyone gives everyone a participation trophy, and then everyone feels good about themselves. But it's not based on anything. You should feel good about yourself because of your accomplishments, not because somebody yelled at you to feel good about yourself and you got a fucking fake piece of plastic that was sprayed gold and had your name on a plaque on the bottom of it. And when these folks become adults and enter the workforce, and they've done stories about this, how you can't treat them, the boss can't yell, hey, let's go. Let's get back to work now. And, oh, you raised your voice to me. You better watch your tone, buddy. My dad's a lawyer. I'll sue your ass. I'll take this company. Self-entitled pricks who think the world owes them a living. And now we're getting the first wave of these douchebags. And now they grew up, and it's fine if you grow up in this little snow globe of a life where everything is awesome and everyone gets a participation trophy and there's
snowing.
no losers. Well, when you get shaken up, and everything's awesome. But then you get out into the real world and you realize I'm a fucking loser. You're not doing that well. You're not making that much money. There's no more participation trophies. This is the fucking LA Auto Show. You don't get to sit around and go, hey, here's my piece of shit I worked on. Everyone, why aren't you guys buying it? And then instead of finding a fucking mirror and finding the reason why no one's buying your car, you just want to run around and yell at everyone else who's selling cars. And now you want to take shit and throw it at the cars because you want to fuck their cars up. Because that's what's going on. It's like, instead of looking in the mirror and go, why the fuck am I not doing better? You just find some guys got more shit than you and go, hey man, what do you need all that shit for? It's the same version of, hey man, what do you need an MVP trophy for? Because I bust my ass. That's why. Or maybe I'm just genetically better than you. Either way, buddy, I got the trophy. So shut the fuck up and get the fuck back to work, or better yet, on the bench where you belong. This is what's going on. So they're feeling shame. They've been shamed by life because they haven't been prepared for life. They've been had so much smoke blown up their fucking collective asses by the time they get out in the real world, and they realize the real world doesn't give a fuck where you're from or what your mommy said you were or how pretty you are or what you do. They don't give a fuck what anyone, and all those lies that were told to your parents about how special you are and how no one was created like you, and all this bullshit advertised with Nike and all this, like, it's just one you and you take it all and it's your world and all that Reebok shit doesn't mean shit when you get to the real world and you're just looked at as peon number 27 who's putting in an application, and guess what? I don't like your attitude, douche. Fuck douche.
Ass douche.
Ass douche. Get your fucking feet off my desk and hit the bricks. I'm not hiring you. Then now your plan is to come back and throw a brick at my window. That's your plan. This is what's going on. It's this envy and shame, and there's going to be a lot more of it. Because it used to be, back in the day, father'd be walking his son down the sidewalk, and you'd see a guy go by in a Rolls Royce, and the father would say, there goes Mr. Jenkins. Look up to him. That guy works hard. That guy built a company. That guy built an empire. Now look at him. He's got his Rolls Royce. He's driving up the hill. But what do we do now? Now it's like, oh, look at him. Look at him. Does he need that car?
Yeah.
Why does he need that car? I'm driving a fucking Chevette. Why does he get to drive that fucking car? You know, let's go up there and throw a rock at it. That ain't going to help you get out of the Chevette, ass douche.
That's right.
Get the fuck to work. And by the way, parents, society, we are creating a group of self-entitled monsters. Well, let's knock it off.
Right. And I'm wondering, all the parents that created this culture of ass douchery, are they the ones who are feeling like, well, I was never told I was special enough? Like, are they overcompensating for their childhood? Because now there's been like sort of a few generations that are aware of Dr. Spock and aware that kids have special emotional needs and et cetera.
We started, we have these weird swings in raising kids, and they're not very good. I mean, I grew up in the sort of 70s, just free to be me, you and me. Hey, man, if he doesn't want to learn to read, he doesn't have to learn to read. Yeah, just run wild, free range, do your own thing, man. That whole hippie, do your own thing, never fucking panned out. And the super self-esteem building and just all this bullshit where we have to knock down a Christmas celebration, call it a holiday celebration so we don't offend the one kid whose parents are litigious or whatever. We fucked our society up royally. We've basically taken that one kid and empowered him, and we've got to stop because that's what all this is. It used to be that you looked, I'm not saying you took random rich guys and worshipped at their altar, but you took guys who built something and you said, there's a guy who's accomplished something, not, well, why isn't he paying his fair share? I mean, when did that ever fucking come about? That guy paid in millions of dollars last year. You paid in shit and you're pissed at him? Obviously, it doesn't make sense. Obviously, it's not a rational thought. It's shame-driven. And you want to extrapolate this. This is essentially what the terrorists do with us. They see us over here in our hot tubs, driving our big cars around, having our parties, turning on...
Dude, big cars with hot tubs.
Yeah, stretch limos with hot tubs. Our chicks looking hot, fake boobies
Splashing
and
all over
bikinis
the
and all
road.
that. And they're like, fuck it, Allah's going to take care of these guys. And then Allah doesn't take care of shit. And then they come down and blow our buildings up. It's this weird, it's not, we think it's about religion or we think it's about, cultures. It's one culture can't live next to another culture that's thriving without getting pissed off, envious, resentful. You then get shamed, and when you get shamed, there's two things you can do with shame. You can be shamed and go, I better get my shit together, or you can be shamed and go, I'm going to tear that guy's shit down, and that's where we're at now. When you feel that shame, get your shit together, leave my shit alone.
Yeah, it's like global sibling rivalry.
Thank you. That's what it is. It's old. It's as old as the Bible.
And there you have it. Adam Carolla unleashed that tirade at the younger members of the Occupy Wall Street movement, but it applies perfectly to this supposed outrage that these men's groups feel over not being able to get laid. We have brought up several generations of participation trophy recipients, and while certainly not all of them, in fact, very few of them, grow up to behave like Elliot Rodger, the connection to his own system of thought is undeniable. The sniveling, contemptuous envy of people who are successful felt by spoiled brats who think they ought to be rewarded simply for showing up. If you want to work towards a better future, then this is one costly error that must be addressed. Rather than teaching children it's not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game, we must teach them that it's about winning in the most honorable, honest, and fulfilling way possible, and that failure is only an opportunity to learn to improve. Elliot Rodger never learned that lesson, and it is crucial that we all learn it and pass it on to future generations. There will one day be another shooter with their own unique set of motivations and justifications. There is no single shift in society that will guarantee tragedies like this never happen again. But if you wish to correct the error in our modern culture that encouraged and allowed for this tragedy to happen, then the answer is now before you.